Happy Thursday, everyone, and thanks for standing by. Today we'll be talking about using webinars throughout the customer journey and beyond. My name is Janae Sellers, and I'm the Demand Generation Manager here at ReadyTalk. And I'm really excited today because I'm joined by Matthew Sweezy, who is a marketing evangelist at Pardot. We're each going to give a brief introduction and tell you all a little bit more about ourselves before we get started, but first I'd like to cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. Please note that all of today's audio lines are muted and participants will be in a listen-only mode, so you won't be able to talk to us through your computer speakers or the phone. However, we'd love to continue the conversation, so if you have a comment or a question, please feel free to use the chat function on the left-hand side of the screen. We'll be sure to try and save time at the end of today's presentation for question and answers. The event is being recorded, so everyone who registered will be receiving a link to the recording and a copy of the presentation at some point in your email inbox later today. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, we'd love it if you followed along. So if you're on Twitter, we're using the hashtag today of ReadyTalkWS, which stands for ReadyTalk Webinar Series. Or if you have something specifically for me, you can reach out at ReadyTalk, and Matthew is at msweezy. So as I mentioned earlier, my name is Janae, and I'm the Demand Gen Manager at ReadyTalk. I most recently joined ReadyTalk in September, which makes you all my first webinar audience. So thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I'm on the marketing team, and my primary responsibilities include our email marketing program, managing social media, doing some landing page website design, and then of course today's webinar series, which you're on. And then just so you can get to know me a little bit better, some fun facts. I'm a Colorado native. ReadyTalk is based here in Denver, so that seems to be kind of a rarity these days. And then in college, I thought it would be a good idea to go on the show Judge Judy. So now I will turn it over to Matthew, and he can tell you a little bit more about himself.
Yeah, definitely not as cool as going on Judge Judy in my profile. Yeah, fun fact about myself, I only have one T in my first name. My mother didn't want people to call me Matt. I think anyone that's ever heard of me has probably heard me say that before. I'm the head of thought leadership for B2B marketing at Pardot and Salesforce, and also the author of Marketing Automation for Dummies. I speak around the world mostly on topics such as lead nurturing, lead scoring, B2B demand generation, anything in that vein, and excited to be here with you guys. And I'm a Georgia native living in Atlanta, which is just as rare, Janae.
Well, happy to hear it. So before we get started with the presentation today, I always like to kind of kick things off with a little poll to kind of help me better understand who I'm talking with. So if you all don't mind answering and telling me a little bit about your webinar use case, you can check more than one box, so please do check all that apply. I'll give you just a second to chime in with your answers, and then we'll get started. All right, great. It looks like a majority of you had a chance to answer, so I'm going to go ahead and close this out. If you didn't get a chance, it's not a big deal, so don't worry about it. Looks like based on the poll, a lot of you are using webinars for customer or partner training, which is great, and it's kind of split across the rest of the majority, and a small portion of you aren't using webinars, so hopefully after today you'll learn a little bit more and can get that portion going. So as I mentioned, I'm going to kick things off, and I'm going to talk first about how you can use webinars to find net new prospects. And before we dive into that, I think it's kind of important to outline at a high level the buyer's journey. So I've stolen a portion of this from our friends over at Pardot. They use the awareness, consideration, decision model when they're talking about the buyer's journey. And then for the purpose of today, I've added retention here as well, because we will be talking about how to use webinars once you've acquired customers past the point of sale. So on that note, I think it's important to identify that according to a demand gen report published last year, 67% of B2B buyers have used webinars to research their purchasing decisions, and that was within the past year of their buying. So I think, in the awareness stage when you're trying to find net new prospects, it's important to look at almost 7 out of 10 people are using webinars, and at this point they're kind of trying to identify what their need is. So so what a great way to kind of kick things off and get them hopefully interested in your products. So as I mentioned, the net new buyer aligns to the awareness phase, and at this point these people are early in the buying process, which means they're not necessarily ready to buy yet. So you shouldn't be trying to sell them your products or solutions at this point. Instead, it's important to focus on holding high-level and engaging webinars that can inform and educate your audience. And just to kind of further hit on this point, Gail Canary at Serious Decisions has said, your messaging should be more problem-focused than company or product-focused. This change in how you present content is extremely important in providing value to your audience. And I think the value point kind of hits home because as you're trying to find a net new prospect, it's important that they're attracted to whatever it is that you're kind of offering. So by educating your webinar participants, you can create brand advocates who will hopefully eventually become customers. And on the ReadyTalk side, I just wanted to kind of provide a few examples of how we're doing that. So these are 3 webinar titles from presentations we've held recently. And again, we're trying to hit the prospect kind of on that high-level messaging. So explaining why they might need a stronger demand gen strategy, or how they can fill their content pipeline, or how to survive and thrive in a new marketing landscape in this world of kind of content marketing that we're hearing so much about. And then just to further illustrate this, I also pulled this slide from a webinar that we held last year with our friends over at Scripted. And this is just to further explain that webinars can be applied to any buyer stage. So you'll see over on the left side, they're talking at an extremely high level just about content in general. So that would align to the awareness phase. And then as we move to the right, they're kind of getting more buyer specific. On the farthest right, it's more product focused, so an actual how to use Scripted's dashboard, something that someone either really close to buying the tool would want to be interested in, or someone who's already a customer. And then lastly, I just wanted to discuss at this point too, calls to action are really important. So when you're using webinars to find net new prospects, you want to make sure that your follow-up and your call to action kind of align to this buyer stage as well. At ReadyTalk, we like to use infographics, white papers, and ebooks because we're trying to help potential customers understand their pain points and build awareness of our product and solution as it exists. So as you'll see in the slide, I've included an example of a featured asset we use for webinars on our website, which is is a white paper that aligns to the 8 common webinar myths. So again, it's trying to educate potential buyers about webinars, hopefully leading them to ReadyTalk as a potential solution. So that is all I have on how to use webinars to find net new prospects, and now I'm going to hand it over to Matthew.
Great, thanks, Janae. And really what I want to hit on is there's been a couple of questions I've seen come in, and I really want to help you guys understand that webinars are not only just for net new, it's really how do you help people move them through the cycle, right? Once we find them, how do we convert them, and how do we make those people into actual dollars for our business? What I want people to kind of understand is part of my job and part of my role is really primary research, so sitting down and actually digging into consumers' minds and the psychology of how they do things and why they do things, so that we as businesses can better relate to them. So what you can see on the screen right now is a chart that I've created based off of some of this research. Let me explain this real quick. What you see on the black dotted line is the daily content consumption of an individual over time. It's going to be about an average, right? You're going to read about the same amount of tweets per day. You're going to spend about the same amount of time on Facebook. You're going to read the same amount of whatever on a daily basis on average. But now this drastically changes when you get into some type of a problem and you need to solve that. Now let me give you a scenario real quick. Now do you do A or B? When you go online to first off do research, so let's say that you're trying to buy something or solve a problem, and you go to Google and you ask Google a question, and you then find a white paper. Do you instantly download that white paper, log offline and read it, or you do B? Find about 5 or 6 or 7 white papers, log off, and one day hope to read them? And the answer is most likely you probably do B. You probably batch research, and that's because the power of the Internet allows you to do these things. So what we need to understand in the buying cycle is that there's multiple different cycles that go in through the research phase. Research defining that the person is engaged in the buying cycle. So once you've already broken through that awareness, now let's help guide them through. And what I've found out is there's 3 different stages, and during each stage people want very different content, and they also want that content very specific to that stage and that problem. Let me give you a quick scenario. I was at a wedding one time sitting next to a girl, and she told me that she used ExactTarget and wasn't very happy with it. Well, I was currently an employee of ExactTarget at the time and said, well, that's not good. How can I help? And she said, well, it doesn't do good enough segmentation. And I said, well, what do you mean? She says, well, what I want to have happen is when the tool, when someone opts out, I want that tool to remove that person from one list and put them on another list. I said, well, that's your problem. That's not segmentation. That's called automation. You need marketing automation. She says, no, 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 no. I just need better segmentation. So if you can put these two things together, what you could see is this person would be in the first of these three ways. And she'd be searching for the word segmentation. However, if I would, and I know that she needs marketing automation, but if I put a video or a call to action or an email in front of her that said Pardot was the best marketing automation platform, she would not find that relevant. So my point here is to move people through the sales cycle using webinars. You need to understand what is very specific to the person at that stage in terms of the context and the content. If you can map those two things together through video, you can do it very, very powerfully. Now I simply break this down into three different types of content, the first being escapism. So think about this. If you want to use, first off, a webinar can be recorded and then be replayed as a video. If you want to have this and shown and be a constant lead driver, and you're going to be using these things on social channels, think about what people want when they're on social channels and they're looking to escape. You go onto Facebook while you're at work to escape your daily job. Here's a great example of something we've done. It's the Bear Facts with Kyle Lacey and Jay Bear. This is a very casual, super easy, very lax, more comical, but also very powerful form of content. It's a video, right? Now let's take a second step. The next type of content you should be able to have and produce to help move people through is learning content. People want to be better at their job, and helping them be better at their job is content that people want to engage with. Now here's a great example of a webinar I did with E. Cornell, Why Branding is Dead and Why Mindset is Your Only Help to the Future. Right, now this helps people, helps marketers be better at their job. Does it talk anything about my product as a Salesforce or Pardot employee as better CRM or marketing automation? The answer is no. But what it does do is it helps marketers, our core market, be better at their job. It helps building that relationship at a deeper level, very much what Janae mentioned earlier. And then finally the third type is research. And you need to understand that research changes. People have different questions throughout this research cycle. And then there's a question that came in through chat. And it says, and the question I believe that came in through chat was, should you begin picking on pain points right away or using competitive solutions right away and talking about those things in your titles? And the answer is you have to pinpoint the webinar to the specific point in the person's journey or cycle to be relevant. And if you're doing this through research, these are easily done. Demos are a great point in time at the end of the research cycle. So those are a couple of the new ways. Now let's also take this and expand this. So let's say you're trying to then move somebody through the sales cycle using webinars. This means using these webinars and producing and promoting these things out there in the digital world. Consider using new technology such as account-based marketing to then distribute and advertise these webinars to highly specific people in these specific stages. So let's say you have a webinar that is tailored to the very early stages of the buying process. Target those companies that you know are in that stage and then advertise only to those people. That's a great use case of what we would call account-based marketing. Right? Think about then using dynamic content on your site. Right? So when you've got a content on your website, consider having that content dynamic. So when a person comes back to your website, you already know who they are because you're using a marketing automation platform and have that behavioral-based tracking built in. But now you can say, hey John, I know you're in stage 2. So I'm going to show you one call out for stage 2 and one call out for stage 3. So you have the ability to then see exactly where somebody is, target and show them a call out for either an upcoming webinar or a recorded webinar. And just like Janae said, it never, never, never end without multiple calls to action. And we'll talk a little bit about this in a little while, but what I want you guys to understand is that webinar is not a one-time hit. You're producing an asset that has a lifetime value. So when that webinar ends, make sure you then keep that person engaged. Offer them something else on that same topic, and then offer them the next step to the next level. This is called a secondary call to action, or a choose your own adventure technique. Hey John, I noticed you watched this webinar on lead scoring. Do you want to learn more about lead scoring or see a demo on our product? Right, so combine those two things. And with that, I'm going to toss it back over to Janae to talk a little bit more about increasing the lifetime value of your current customers through webinars.
Great, thanks Matthew. Just to elaborate on that last point, at ReadyTalk we've actually been trying to offer 2 calls to action instead of 1 on some new assets as a way to try and increase conversions. And there's been some research out there as well that shows that people will often click more if they have kind of a choice. So if you're not doing that today, I would strongly encourage you to do so. So now let's talk a little bit about increasing the lifetime value. According to Bain & Company, and I've seen this stat a couple different times from a couple different sources, but this is where I most recently found it when pulling this presentation together, it costs 6 to 7 times more to acquire a new customer than to retain an existing one. So it's important to devote time to activities focused on customer retention. And as we polled you guys today, it looks like this is kind of the majority of what you're doing, so that's great. But if you already have an existing webinar platform, you can take advantage of it by having customer-facing trainings, walking them through new product or solution features or rollouts. And then, of course, always it's great to share product or solution best practices or tips and tricks. And so just to give you an example of some things we're doing at ReadyTalk, the top left picture is a customer webinar that we have coming up. We've started this new in this year, so we've only had one so far, but the plan is to do them monthly, a customer webinar series solely for current customers. Prospects can attend if they're interested, but the purpose of these is to teach kind of customer success stories, best practices, tips and tricks, all specific to our product. And then on the bottom right there, you'll see we also hold weekly live training sessions. So these are great for onboarding new customers as well as teaching them as we roll out new features in our product, how to use it so they're getting the most value out of what we provide. And then just because I'm so new at ReadyTalk, I thought it would be a good idea to share an example of what we were doing at my last company, how we used webinars, and we were actually a ReadyTalk client as well. But we had 4 to 5 major product releases a year, and so a lot of times we do these in tandem with a webinar. And we would see the same people registering for these every time we rolled them out, which allowed us and gave us the opportunity to identify our most active user base. And so we were able to go after these people, not only upselling into these accounts, but we realized they were our product champions. And so they were willing to advocate for us publicly, which was great, because we all know there's no better salesperson for whatever your company is offering than to have a happy customer kind of speaking on your behalf. This brings me to my next point, which is all about leveraging your advocates. These people make for great speakers, so soliciting them to participate on webinars gives them the opportunity to showcase some of the great work that they're doing at their companies through your product or solution, and it also breeds loyalty and helps you build closer relationships. So again, at my last job, many of the client speakers that we found and solicited to get on webinars received raises and promotions in part to the webinar forum that we had provided to them, which made them look good, made them feel good, and oftentimes made them more loyal to our brand. So by allowing customers to highlight their success stories or tips and tricks, you can give your clients a way to learn from each other, which will hopefully increase adoption and then add to the lifetime value of the account as well. Since I love my quotes so much, this is my last slide before I switch back over to Matthew, but I just want to point out that Influitive has done some research, and they've stated that 59% of B2B buyers engage with peers who face similar challenges before making a purchase. So as social media kind of continues to dominate, more often people are turning to their peers, looking for recommendations, trying to find people in similar roles or industries to ask them about how they're using products and tools today. So not only can customer advocates help educate your other current customers, and hopefully build those relationships as well. But don't forget that by them sharing their success stories, sometimes they're also able to influence net new business as well. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Matthew.
Awesome. Thanks, Sinead. Now, we've talked a lot about moving people through the sales cycle and bringing in net new leads and doing things with webinars. One of the things that you're going to have to be able to do if you're taking any of these techniques is be able to show the value of these webinars themselves. So what I want to talk about is a couple of very specific ways to show value. And I want to start out with a quote that a good buddy of mine, Russ Glass, he's the head of marketing products over at LinkedIn. I was on a webinar with him just last week, and he brought this quote out, and I want to share it. First off, he says baseball is a best analogy for this. If your baseball, if he's a lead hitter, he's supposed to get on base, and then your cleanup hitter is supposed to bring him in. You measure the leadoff hitter on their batting average, and you measure the cleanup batter on their RBI. You never measure the leadoff batter on RBIs because there's nobody from the bat end. Right? Marketing's the same. If you're using webinars to bring in new leads, you shouldn't be measuring that webinar specifically then on ROI or bringing in the bottom dollars. You need to be able to look at the stage that it's supposed to be tailored to and then value it for what it's supposed to do. And so let's talk about this real quick and a little bit deeper. Right, so first off, stage one. What we want to talk about is if you are trying to bring people inside of the funnel, you're trying to get awareness, we need to look at a couple of different things. First off, was the strategy that we attacked this webinar at correct? Webinar is going to be the basis or the medium, but the content and the context that you use is going to determine the success factors of your webinars. So look at your promo strategy. Set a goal of how many people you want to get in front of and attend. And then if you don't reach that, look at your promo strategy and say, what didn't I do right? Was it my content wasn't right? Was it my strategy wasn't right? And that's going to help you make that better the next time. The next thing you need to do is you're going to then record this webinar. Right? So then it's going to go live. Then measure that attendance and the views again in 90 days to see how it has changed. Has it performed better after it before than it has live? And there's an interesting statistic I'll share, and I think I've got this later in the presentation, but a piece of research I did found that only 16% of people actually prefer to watch a webinar live. You're going to see 3 to 5 times more engagement and leads generated from the webinar as a recording, not just the event itself. And that's because the behaviors of the internet now has changed the human to say, hey, I can get whatever I want whenever I want. If I've got a meeting at the time, I know that I can get that recording or go back on and watch it later. Right? So it's got a much longer shelf life than just the actual event itself. Let's talk about stage 2. This is where we've got a webinar that is trying to drive somebody inside the middle of the funnel. It's trying to get them to the next steps. What we're really trying to drive is engagement with our content. So we want them to be able to watch that webinar and then take that next step. So such as Janae was talking about, anytime that we have those secondary calls to actions, you were able to watch this webinar, now here's the next step. Right? So here's the next call to action. You might want to then download this. You might want to go read this, or you might want to speak to this person. Right? Make sure you then are measuring on were you able to get them to take the next step. And the one thing I want to keep everybody focused in on here is nobody's going to watch a stage 1 webinar and then go do a demo unless they already were ready to do a demo. People follow a logical path. They're going to move at their own pace. And so you need to always make sure that, one, you always are available to show them the next and final steps so that if they want to jump ahead, they can, but you're not optimizing for that. You're optimizing for moving them to the next step. Right? So now let's look at stage 3. Finally, stage 3 is going to be these demonstration webinars. How many of those people that look at that webinar really turn into an opportunity? Stage 3, in my opinion, is anything that talks about you, your product, or your competition. You're going to find that when people get very, very far down in the sales cycle and very towards the bottom of the sales funnel, this is what they're going to be looking for. Why should I use this solution versus that solution? What does Gartner say about this solution versus that solution? These are very product-focused, very specific focused things that get into very deep details that only people in the bottom of the funnel want. Now, what you shouldn't try to measure these things on is attendance numbers. Yes, you always want to have more attendance numbers, but the honesty is that there's very few people in your sales cycle that are ever ready for a stage 3 webinar compared to a stage 1 webinar. So if you have something very generic that's awareness-based, you're going to have a much larger audience or potential audience, and you'd have a much larger attendance versus a stage 3 webinar, which is very niche to the product or specific pain point that a vertical may have. Right? So they're 2 very different types and should be measured on 2 very different types of things. Also, on stage 3 webinars, don't just expect that the people that see it are going to turn into ops the next day. The rule of thumb that I suggest is take your average sales cycle and times it by 2. Then look at the ops that were touched by that webinar at that number, and then that should be the metric that you look at. So if you have a 45-day sales cycle and you air a webinar today, look at all of those accounts that attended that webinar, then look at those accounts in 90 days. See how many of those accounts in 90 days have an opportunity associated with them. That will give you the true effectiveness of that webinar in converting people into opportunities. You don't want to necessarily look at the exact person because somebody else inside that organization might become it. You want to look at the opportunity in the account. So those are some really good ways to look at how do you value those things. And finally, here's that statistic I talked about. A couple of things you need to be realistic with yourself on. First off, you're creating a long time, a long life asset. A webinar is not an event anymore. It is a piece of living content that has a start date, which is interactive, which we're doing here. Then it goes on to be a recording, which lives on forever. It can be transcribed for SEO. It can be shared by nurturing campaigns. It can be hosted on your website for different types of content. It can be shared by salespeople inside the sales cycle to help move people through towards an opportunity. Right? There's a lot of things that these are going to be used for. And I want you guys to just be realistic on how many people are going to attend. On average right now we see about 30% of people from a registration actually attending as a benchmark across multiple different industries. We see that only 16% of people in surveys prefer to watch one live, which means a lot of people will watch that recording, which lends into the fact number 3, that you should expect 3 to 5 times more leads to come from the life cycle of the entire webinar versus the initial registration. Right? So there's a couple of different things to kind of look at. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Janae to do a quick recap.
Thanks, Matt. We're almost out of time, so hopefully we'll have a couple of minutes for questions and answers. But I'd just like to kind of cover, since we moved quickly today, what we talked about. So webinars are a great resource, and they can be used to find net new prospects, move prospects through the sales cycle, or retain current customers. And as kind of Matthew and I have both touched on today, it's important to align your content, calls to action, and any post-webinar follow-up to the appropriate buying stage. I think that's probably a really important one. And then as I mentioned earlier, you can utilize current customers to help advocate on your behalf, whether you want to find net new or continue to have them share kind of their best practices with other existing clients. I think they're a great resource. And then lastly, as Matthew just touched on, it's important to measure the reach, engagement, and the opportunities that result from your webinar efforts. And because webinars are a living piece of content, don't forget that conversions are going to come long after the live event. So now I'm going to pop out some questions here from the chat. And again, if you have any other ones, please feel free to ask them. We'll try to take as many as we can in the next couple minutes. So the first one I've flagged comes from Joyce, and she's asked to discuss the tie-in to a real campaign with social media and other campaign options to drive viewers. So Matthew, you want to try and answer that first?
Yeah, so I'll try to hit this real quick. So if we're talking about using social media to drive people to a webinar, there's a couple different tactics. One is hyper-targeting and inviting people. 2 is going to be some type of paid social display metric. This is also pretty powerful because you can use some super hyper-targeting via paid methodologies through Facebook or through Twitter. And 3rd would be looking at something even like a trailer video. These are highly successful. So there's a great example of a company that did one. They sent out an email a day before with a short trailer video, and that was the only promotion they did. But the trailer video itself was what drove most of the attendance. Right? It's just like a trailer for a regular video. It's getting people pumped up, showing value that they want to attend, and then getting them there through a conversion.
And then just to piggyback on that, at ReadyTalk we like to kind of break the webinar up after it's over and create kind of smaller repurposing videos. So those are often great ways to get people at least a nugget of the content, and then if they're interested they can watch the full webinar. So again, hitting on that point of how you can kind of use them even after the live event is over. The next question is from Lisa, and it says, best first steps if just getting into using webinars as a tool.
I'll start off with that one, Janae, and you can kind of pick up. I'd say the best first steps are first I'll figure out what your buying stages are, your main buyer problems, and then figure out how to create webinars that are compelling to help people answer those questions. And that's the first place I'd start.
Yeah, I think figuring out how you can answer kind of those pain points, and then obviously just aligning your messaging to those types of things, as Matthew is saying, is a great way to start. If you have like a product that you can demonstrate, sometimes those are low-hanging fruits too. And then oftentimes your sales people will be giving presentations, so you can repurpose some of the content that they're delivering kind of out in the field every day and put that into a webinar format. Another question we have is, what are the 3 keys to drive webinar customer journey to conversion? Matthew, do you want to take a first stab?
Yeah, can you repeat that real quick?
Yep. Can you please say the 3 keys to drive webinar customer journey to conversion? So I think, what are the 3 ways to drive someone down kind of a webinar conversion path?
Yes, I'm not sure if this question is like how to use them throughout the life cycle or how to get somebody to convert on a webinar. I'll hit the first one real quick, how to use them kind of through the life cycle. The best thing to do is make sure that they're specifically tailored only to one part in the life cycle. Right, so only answer one question. Another big statistic that I always like to put out there that I've done research on is 71% of people have been disappointed with the content they've downloaded. And 25% of those people that had downloaded that content and were disappointed will never read content from that company again. Right, so make sure that when you're creating content, it's hyper-targeted, hyper-specific, and then stop when you're done. Don't try to move on to the next thing. Allow the person to move themselves on to the next thing through a secondary call to action. Say, if you want to learn more, take the next step. Right? Be respectful of people's time. And that's kind of a basic rule of thumb as to how do you move people through it. So you don't move them. It should give them the option to move.
And then I'll do one last question just because I know we're out of time. We have, what is more effective, webinars, audio and slides only, or webcasts, audio, video of speakers and slides? And I actually probably don't have any data to support this because we don't have a ton of video focus here at ReadyTalk. But Matthew, if you have any opinions, I'd love it if you'd share them.
Yeah, sure. It's six one half dozen another. I don't think there's going to be any conclusive evidence one way or the other. It's always going to go back to the content, not necessarily how it's presented. I've seen, when we do the Jay Bear and the Bear Facts with Kyle Lacey and Jay Bear like we used to do, those were live in video. And then we would record those and put those out. We use those really at the top of the funnel, and we use more screencast demonstrations at the bottom of the funnel. That's just traditionally where they flow. But I don't see one being any more effective than the other. I've seen just as effective things vice versa in the same scenarios. So it's more about the quality of your content versus kind of how you actually structure it.
Great. So since we're out of time, I saw a couple additional questions come in that we didn't get a chance to answer. We can follow up with you guys individually, and then ReadyTalk will be posting a blog, so we may hit on some of those questions as well. Matthew, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk on the webinar series today.
Yeah.
And to everyone that's attended, I hope you found the content useful. We will be emailing out a link to the recording and the presentation slides later today, so you guys should all get that in your inboxes later. And then lastly, if you wouldn't mind, as soon as we exit the meeting here, there's going to be a post-event survey that pops up. It's 3 or 4 questions that shouldn't take you more than a minute to fill out, but your feedback really helps me in planning future webinars, so I'd appreciate it if you could spend some time on that. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and have a great rest of your afternoon.